Sometimes the most powerful way to respond to someone who undervalued you is not through anger, not through proving your worth, but by acting as if they never mattered at all. Because nothing shakes an ego more than realizing the place it thought it held in your world has been erased. His pride may have thrived on your attention, but when you stop giving it, when you live as if his chapter was nothing more than a passing line, you take away the very fuel that kept his ego alive. And that's when regret creeps in, not because you fought for it, but because he'll finally see what it feels like to lose someone who no longer even thinks of him. Indifference is often mistaken for cruelty, but in reality, it's one of the strongest and healthiest responses you can ever have when dealing with someone whose ego once thrived on your attention. When you act indifferent, you're not being unkind, you're simply showing that their power over your emotions has ended. Anger, tears, and constant explanations still show that you care, that you're invested in some way. But indifference, that's the one reaction the ego cannot handle because it communicates in the clearest way possible. You no longer matter here. Think about it. When you cared, every word they said had an effect. A delayed text could ruin your day. An insult could shatter your confidence. Even the smallest sign of affection could lift you up. Your emotions lived and died on their actions, and that gave them power. Their ego became inflated because they knew they had that effect on you. But once you step into indifference, you take back that power. A delayed text no longer phases you. Their silence no longer shakes you. Their approval no longer defines you. Indifference is the language of self-worth because it proves you no longer need them to validate your value. What's so powerful about indifference is that it doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. You don't need to make big speeches about how you're done. You don't need to declare to the world that you've moved on. Indifference shows itself in small, consistent choices like not checking their social media, not waiting for their message, not analyzing their every move. It's about redirecting your focus from them back onto yourself, and when you do that, they notice. They feel the absence of the reactions they once depended on. The very silence of your indifference becomes deafening to their ego. For someone who once thrived on your attention, indifference is the biggest blow. Ego needs to feel important, it needs to feel central, it needs to know it still has a hold. When you act as though it never did, you dismantle the entire illusion it built around itself. He may try to provoke you, send a message, drop hints, test your reaction, but if you maintain your indifference, he quickly learns that the old game no longer works. And that realization eats at him far more than any angry outburst could, because an outburst says, "You still affect me." Indifference says, "You don't." For you, indifference is also freedom. It's the point where you finally stop rehearsing what you'd say if he came back. Stop obsessing over why he did what he did. Stop letting his memory occupy space in your mind. Indifference gives you your life back. It allows you to step into your own light, to live for yourself, to build new joys and experiences that have nothing to do with him. And as you grow more into yourself, indifference stops being something you perform and starts being who you are. You genuinely don't care anymore because you're too busy thriving. The irony is, this is usually when regret creeps in for him, because regret isn't born when you're still chasing or fighting. Regret is born when you've gone silent, when you've moved on, when he realizes the person who once gave him everything now gives him nothing. That's when his ego feels the sting, and the best part, you won't even be watching. Your indifference has already placed you miles ahead, and his regret becomes his problem, not yours. So remember this, indifference isn't about being heartless, it's about being wise. It's about refusing to let someone else's ego dictate how you feel about yourself. And the moment you step into that kind of strength, you'll realize that indifference isn't just a response, it's a revolution. Silence is one of the most underrated forms of strength, especially when it comes to dealing with someone whose ego thrived on your voice, your reactions, and your constant need to be heard. For a person who once relied on your explanations, your arguments, or even your pleas, silence becomes unbearable. It strips them of the ability to feed their pride, because ego cannot survive without attention. Words give them something to hold onto, something to twist, something to dismiss. But silence leaves them with nothing but themselves, and that is often the hardest truth for their ego to face. When you choose silence, you're not running away and you're not being weak. You're communicating in a way that's far more powerful than shouting ever could be. Silence says, you no longer have access to me. It says, you are no longer worth my energy. And in that absence of words, the message becomes louder than any confrontation. Because deep down, the ego wants you to keep engaging. It wants to know it still matters, even if what you're saying is negative. Every argument, every explanation, every attempt to make him see what he lost is still giving him exactly what he wants: your focus. Silence denies him that satisfaction entirely. The beauty of silence is that it puts the attention back where it belongs, on you. When you stop spending your voice on someone who doesn't deserve it, you start hearing yourself more clearly. You begin to notice how much energy you wasted trying to be understood by someone who never cared to listen. Silence teaches you that you don't need closure from him because your peace comes from within. It's in those quiet moments that you begin to heal, that you begin to see the truth for what it is, without the fog of back and forth conversations clouding your judgment. And silence isn't about ignoring for the sake of revenge. It's about choosing peace over chaos. It's about no longer letting him trigger you into reacting, no longer giving him the gift of knowing he can still get to you. When you withhold your words, you take back control. You're no longer playing the game on his terms. Instead, you set a boundary without needing to announce it. Silence becomes the boundary. Silence becomes the wall that protects your energy. And ironically, it's the thing that unsettles him most, because he has no idea what you're thinking, no idea how you feel, no idea what comes next. That mystery gnaws at the ego in ways words never could. He may try to provoke you when your silence sets in. He might send messages, drop hints, or even do things just to get a reaction out of you. But the moment you remain quiet, the moment you resist the urge to break that silence, he begins to feel the shift. His ego realizes it no longer commands the stage it once did. And that's when regret begins to creep in, not because you told him off, but because you stopped talking altogether. Ego craves relevance. Silence makes it irrelevant. For you, silence becomes a practice of dignity. It's not that you don't have words to say. You simply know they're not worth saying to him. Your silence isn't empty. It's full of self-respect, full of boundaries, full of strength. And in choosing it, you prove to yourself that you no longer need to fight to be heard. You've already heard yourself, and that's enough. So while he wrestles with the discomfort of your silence, while his ego feels the absence of your voice, you'll find peace in the quiet. You'll discover that silence isn't just about him. It's about creating space for yourself to grow, to thrive, to move forward. And the louder your life becomes in its joy and fulfillment, the more your silence will echo in his mind. Because sometimes the most powerful sound is no sound at all. Indifference is a language more powerful than anger, more cutting than confrontation, and more lasting than any temporary revenge. When you show someone indifference, you're telling them that their presence or absence makes no difference to your life. That they are not a factor in your happiness, not a variable in your peace, not a weight you carry anymore. For someone whose ego once thrived on your attention, whether that attention was positive or negative, your indifference is the ultimate ego breaker. Because what the ego craves more than anything is relevance. It wants to know it mattered, that it had impact, that it left a mark. And when you act as though none of it mattered, it shakes the very foundation of his pride. Indifference isn't about pretending you don't care while secretly obsessing. That's just another form of attention, one he could still feel. True indifference is when your energy has shifted so fully back to yourself that he no longer lives rent-free in your head. You're not thinking of ways to get his attention. You're not playing out what you'd say if you saw him again. You're not tracking his life through social media, looking for signs of regret. Instead, your life has become about you again. Your passions, your joy, your goals, your peace. That shift is not just healing, it's transformational. What makes indifference so powerful is that it gives nothing for his ego to latch onto. Anger still acknowledges him, revenge still acknowledges him, even sadness still acknowledges him. But indifference communicates that he doesn't even make the list of what deserves your emotional energy. That lack of acknowledgement is deafening. It tells him without words that he didn't leave the legacy he thought he did in your life. His ego built a fantasy that he would always matter to you in some way, that even if things ended, you'd carry his shadow around. Indifference erases that fantasy, and here's the thing, indifference isn't about denying your feelings. It's not pretending you were never hurt or that the relationship never mattered. It's about moving through those feelings and arriving at a place where they no longer control you. Where the thought of him doesn't trigger you, doesn't move you, doesn't shift your state of being. That's when you know you've reclaimed your power. When you can be in the same room, see his name, hear his voice, and feel nothing but neutrality. That neutrality is kryptonite to the ego, because ego wants to believe it's unforgettable. It wants to believe it left a scar. But when you treat him like any other stranger, when his name doesn't sting and his presence doesn't faze you, that's when he realizes the truth. He lost the privilege of mattering to you. And that realization cuts deeper than any speech you could deliver. For you, indifference is freedom. It means you're no longer tethered to the ups and downs of what he thinks or does. It means your peace isn't dependent on his regret, your joy isn't tied to his validation, your worth isn't entangled with his attention. It means you've walked out of his story and fully re-entered your own. And the beautiful irony is that while you're busy living and thriving, his ego is left with a haunting question. How does she not care anymore? The answer is simple. You chose yourself. You chose to rise above the noise, above the need to prove anything, above the temptation to keep him relevant. You chose indifference not as a weapon, but as a shield that guards your peace. And while his ego struggles with the quiet rejection of being forgotten, you're free to build a life where he never existed in the first place. Living well is not just the best revenge, it's the only true closure you'll ever need. Because at the end of the day, nothing dismantles someone's ego more effectively than seeing you thrive without them. His ego wants to believe that you'll struggle, that you'll miss him, that you'll constantly look back at what you lost. But the moment you step into your power and start building a life so full, so rich, and so joyful that his absence doesn't even register, you've already won. Not because you set out to prove anything to him, but because you finally chose to invest all the love and energy you once gave him into yourself. When you live well, you're not just distracting yourself, you're elevating yourself. You're rediscovering passions that once made you feel alive. You're surrounding yourself with people who appreciate your presence rather than take it for granted. You're chasing goals that remind you of your worth and your capability, and each step you take forward becomes a statement that says, I was never defined by you, I am defined by me. That's what stings the ego the most, realizing that you were never dependent, that your life does not fall apart in his absence, but instead flourishes. What often keeps us stuck is the illusion that the other person still holds power over our happiness. But when you deliberately create a life of fulfillment, you shatter that illusion. You realize that your laughter doesn't belong to him, your joy doesn't belong to him, your future doesn't belong to him. They belong to you, and once you reclaim that truth, you begin to embody the kind of strength and radiance that no one can ignore. He may try to dismiss it, but deep down, his ego will feel it, the undeniable truth that he no longer has influence over your world. There's also something incredibly magnetic about living well. It's not just about surface level success or appearances. It's about the glow that comes when you're genuinely happy, when your days are filled with meaning, when your spirit feels light. People notice that energy, they're drawn to it. And the irony is that while you're attracting new opportunities, new friendships, and new love, he'll be sitting with the realization that he's not a part of that story anymore. That his ego, once so sure of its place in your life, is now standing on the outside looking in. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require bitterness. You don't have to wish him harm, you don't have to dwell on whether he regrets losing you, and you don't have to keep tabs on his life. Your focus is entirely on your own growth. That detachment is what makes it so powerful. Because while his ego feeds off drama, arguments, and proof that he still matters, you're starving it of all attention. Instead, you're feeding your own spirit with things that make you feel alive, and nothing dismantles ego like being irrelevant. Living well also means rewriting the narrative. Instead of your story being one where he broke you, it becomes one where his leaving was the very thing that set you free to build something greater. His role shrinks into a small, irrelevant chapter in a much bigger book where you are the main character. And when he looks back, when he tries to fit himself into your story again, he'll realize with a pang of regret that the story has already moved on without him. So live well not to prove him wrong, but to prove yourself right. Live well because you deserve a life that feels like yours, not one that revolves around someone else's ego. Live well because happiness is the one thing that cannot be faked, and when it radiates from you authentically, it speaks volumes louder than any words ever could. That's the moment his ego finally faces the truth. He didn't break you, he freed you to become unstoppable. Detachment is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself after walking away from someone whose ego once overshadowed your peace. It's the act of cutting the invisible strings that kept you tied to their validation, their moods, their choices, and their approval. Detachment doesn't mean you never cared. It doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you've reached a place where their behavior no longer dictates your emotions, where their presence or absence no longer determines your happiness. It's about reclaiming control over your inner world so that you no longer live in reaction to theirs. When you practice detachment, you stop waiting for apologies that may never come. You stop hoping for clarity from someone who doesn't have the emotional depth to give it. You stop replaying scenarios in your head, imagining what you could have said or done differently. Instead, you accept that closure doesn't come from him, it comes from you. Detachment is about freeing yourself from the endless loop of what if, and stepping firmly into the reality of what is. And that reality is simple. He's no longer part of your story, and that's exactly how it should be. What makes detachment so powerful against ego is that ego feeds on attachment. His pride thrived on knowing you were emotionally hooked, whether through love, pain, or anger. He didn't mind being the cause of your stress, as long as he knew he still had a hold over you. But when you detach, that hold vanishes. Your silence, your peace, your refusal to react, all send one clear message: you've let go. And nothing injures ego more than realizing it no longer has influence. Detachment is also about choosing perspective. You begin to see that his role in your life was temporary, not defining. You start to recognize that the love you gave wasn't wasted, but rather a lesson that shaped your strength and clarified your standards. You no longer see yourself as a victim of what he did, but as a victor who walked away with wisdom. That shift changes everything, because instead of dwelling on the pain he caused, you start appreciating the freedom you now have to build a life aligned with your true worth. And detachment doesn't just happen overnight, it's a daily practice. It's choosing not to check his social media. It's choosing not to engage in conversations that revolve around him. It's choosing to redirect your thoughts when they wander back to him, reminding yourself that his relevance in your story ended the day you walked away. Each of these small choices builds your emotional resilience, and over time, you realize that his presence doesn't even cross your mind anymore. That's when detachment becomes your new reality, not just a temporary effort. The beauty of detachment is that it gives you back to yourself. It opens space in your heart and mind for new experiences, new people, and new opportunities. You're no longer weighed down by resentment or hope for something that no longer exists. Instead, you feel lighter, freer, and more at peace. And ironically, the moment you stop caring, the moment you truly detach, is often the moment his ego begins to crumble. Because while you're moving forward, he's left wondering why he no longer matters to you at all. Detachment is the ultimate form of strength because it's quiet. It doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic exits. It's the calm, steady assurance that your happiness no longer depends on someone who didn't value it. And that quiet strength will echo louder in his life than any words of anger ever could. Because when you detach, you're not just letting go of him, you're letting go of everything that kept you from fully stepping into your own power. Karma has a way of handling what you no longer need to carry, and that is the final piece of freedom you give yourself when you act like he never mattered. His ego may have convinced him that he could walk away without consequence, that he could treat you as disposable and never feel the weight of it. But life has a way of circling back. The seeds we plant always grow, whether we want them to or not, and when someone plants seeds of arrogance, neglect, or cruelty, they eventually find themselves surrounded by the weeds of their own actions. Karma doesn't need your help. It doesn't need you to plan revenge or force him to see what he lost. It works silently, in its own time, and always with precision. The beauty of trusting karma is that it allows you to release the burden of needing justice. When you try to control how or when he regrets losing you, you're still tethered to his story. You're still investing energy in the idea of him learning a lesson. But when you let go and hand it over to karma, you reclaim that energy for yourself. You stop waiting for his downfall and you start rising into your own life. That shift is liberating because it means you no longer hinge your peace on whether he ever understands the damage he caused. Instead, you trust that the universe, life, or simply the natural order of things will reveal it to him at exactly the right time. And regret always comes. It just doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it hits when he sees you living your best life, realizing he's no longer part of it. Sometimes it comes when he tries to replace you and discovers that no one matches the depth of what you once gave so freely. Sometimes it arrives quietly, late at night, when he's left alone with the truth of how he treated you. But the when and how are irrelevant to you, because by then you've already moved on. His regret belongs to him, not to you. It's his karma, not your responsibility. Karma also teaches a deeper lesson. You don't have to dirty your hands to teach someone a lesson. You don't need to prove your worth or force them to see it. The way you carry yourself, the way you detach, the way you elevate your life becomes the proof. Your healing becomes the loudest response, and his regret becomes the quiet background noise that plays long after you've left the room. That's the power of letting karma do the work. And here's the most freeing truth. His regret won't change your future. It won't undo the pain. It won't erase the past. and it won't make you any more valuable than you already are. What it does is remind him of the cost of his ego. His pride may have blinded him in the moment, but over time, life has a way of removing that illusion. He will see the truth, even if he never admits it out loud, and when that moment comes, it won't matter to you anymore, because by the time karma catches up with him, you'll be so far ahead, so rooted in your own happiness, that his regret won't even touch you. Trusting karma means trusting that the universe balances itself. You don't have to chase justice or force regret. All you have to do is walk away, live well, and let life handle the rest. Because while his ego eventually crumbles under the weight of its own choices, you'll already be free, living proof that nothing is more powerful than walking away with dignity and letting karma finish the story for you. Walking away like he never mattered is not about denial, it's about freedom. It's not about pretending you weren't hurt. It's about choosing not to let that hurt define you. The moment you stop feeding his ego with your energy, your words, or even your thoughts, you reclaim the most powerful thing you've always had, yourself. His ego may crave relevance, but your silence, your indifference, your thriving life will be the loudest message you ever send. And while karma does its quiet work, you don't need to wait for the day he regrets it, because by then you'll already be living a life so full and so beautiful that his regret won't matter. So choose detachment, choose peace, choose joy, walk away without hesitation, without looking back, without regret. Not because you're proving anything to him, but because you're proving everything to yourself, that you are stronger, braver, and more deserving than his ego could ever allow. And when you live that truth, you'll realize the sweetest victory is not in his regret, it's in your freedom.